The wedding was already set. The dress had been sewn, the food had been prepared, and the girl, 17 years old, trembling like a leaf in a November wind, had been told she had no choice. Her name was Grace. And on the morning that should have ended her life as she knew it, a stranger stepped out of a black car on the red dust road of Okafor village, looked at the commotion in the compound, and did something no one expected. He stopped everything. But here is what nobody knew. Here is the truth that the whole village would spend months refusing to believe. The man they all praised, the man they called the hero, was not the one who had truly saved her. The real savior had been there all along, watching, waiting, suffering in silence, standing at a rusty gate at the edge of that same village every single day. In a faded uniform that smelled of dust and old iron, a man so invisible that even the children ran past him without looking up. His name was Samuel, and Samuel had a secret so heavy it had bent his spine and grayed his hair before his time. A secret that, when it finally came into the light, would shatter everything Okafor village believed about grace, about sacrifice, and about what a father's love truly looks like. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe to Untold African Folktale Stories so you never miss a story. Stories like this one, where the truth hides in plain sight, are why we gather here. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Daniel was not a man who visited small villages. His life existed in conference rooms with floor-to-ceiling glass, in restaurants where the menu had no prices, in the back seat of a car that cost more than most men in Okafor village would earn in 40 years. He was 44 years old, the founder of Ose Construction Group, a company whose name appeared on buildings in 3 countries. His suits were tailored in Lagos. His shoes were shined by a man whose only job was to shine shoes. Daniel had everything the world called success. And yet, in the quiet of his Abuja penthouse, when the city went dark and the lights of other people's lives glimmered, below, like fallen stars, Daniel Ose sat alone. He had been alone since his wife, Ades, died 3 years prior. A car accident on a wet road in the rainy season. A moment. Gone. Diad poured himself into his work after that, into contracts and concrete and commission reports, because grief has no room in a full calendar. But emptiness follows a man itis pati. It always finds him, in the end. He had come to Okafor village that particular Friday, for one reason only, to inspect a road construction site his company had contracted in the local government area. It was a routine trip. He had been told it would take 4 hours. He had not expected to stay for days. Now, and Grace. Grace Adaoba was the daughter of Constance. Adaoba, a woman who ran a small tailoring shop from the front room of a concrete house at the edge of the village. Grace was 17. She was in her final year of secondary school, and her teachers spoke of her the way people speak of a rare thing, quietly, carefully, as though to say it too loudly might make it disappear. She had won the regional mathematics prize 2 years in a row. She kept her textbooks covered in brown paper to protect the spines. At night, when the kerosene lamp was too expensive to burn, she studied by the light that leaked from the neighbor's window, holding her book at the angle that caught most of the glow. She woke before 5 every morning to fetch water, to sweep, to prepare her mother's breakfast, and still arrived at school before the gate was opened. Grace did not ask for much from the world. She asked only to be allowed to continue. That was the one thing her mother had decided to take from her. Constance Adaoba, Fomo, Coldite Constance, had struck a deal. Reginald Emba, a wealthy palm oil trader in his early 60s, had seen Grace at the market 3 months prior. He had sent a message to Constance. He wanted the girl as a wife. He was offering a bride price generous enough to clear the debt on Constance's shop, to repair the roof that had leaked through 2 rainy seasons, to buy a new sewing machine and still have money left over. To Constance, this was not cruelty. This was arithmetic. Grace had wept. She had begged. She had placed her examination results on her mother's table, like an argument made of paper. Look what I can become. But Constance had pushed the papers aside and told her that dreams were for people who could afford them. The wedding was set for a Saturday, and it was the Friday before that Saturday that Daniel Ose's black car turned slowly down the red dust road of Okafor village, and the gatekeeper at the village entrance, an old man in a faded green uniform, watched the car pass with eyes that held something more than curiosity. Samuel Adaoba watched that car, and he straightened his spine for the first time in years, because Samuel Adaoba shared a surname with Grace. And in this village, where everyone knew everything, nobody had ever thought to ask why. The ceremony preparations were already visible from the road. Plastic chairs had been arranged in the compound. A canopy of orange and white stood over the entrance. Women moved in and out, carrying trays of food that filled the morning air with the smell of jollof rice and frying plantain. The smell of celebration wearing the costume of a funeral. Daniel's driver had slowed to navigate a pothole when Daniel saw her. Grace stood at the edge of the compound in a white lace dress that was 2 sizes too large. It had been borrowed. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and her eyes. Her eyes were the eyes of someone looking for a door in a room with no doors. She was not crying. That was what struck Daniel most. She was past crying. She had gone somewhere inside herself that tears could not reach. Daniel told his driver to stop. He did not know why. He would not be able to explain it afterward. Not fully. He would say only that he had seen grief before. He had lived inside it, and he knew its particular shape on a human face. And what he saw on the face of that girl was not wedding joy. It was surrender. He stepped out of the car. What is happening here? He asked a woman passing with a tray. The woman smiled proudly. A wedding, sir? A good man is taking a wife today. Daniel looked again at Grace, at the borrowed dress, at the hands that were clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. How old is she? He asked. The woman's smile flickered. Old enough, she said, and moved on. Daniel walked toward the compound. The groom arrived then, Reginald Emba, in an embroidered agbada of deep burgundy, his stomach preceding him, his chin lifted with the absolute confidence of a man who had purchased something and was pleased with the transaction. He looked at Grace, the way a man looks at furniture he has ordered and is relieved to find undamaged. Time-stopped Daniel felt something cold move through him. He was about to turn back to his car, because what business was this of his? Truly, what right did a stranger have when a hand touched his elbow? He turned. Standing beside him was the old gatekeeper. Samuel. Up close, he was a man of perhaps 55, though he looked older. His face was weathered like wood left out in too many rainy seasons. His uniform was pressed despite its age. His eyes were the same shape as the girl's in the white dress. Daniel did not notice this yet. He would notice it later, in the way you notice the thing that was always there after someone finally names it. Sir, Samuel said, very quietly, I know you are a man of means. I know you have no reason to listen to a gate, but I am asking you, please, do not leave yet. Daniel looked at him. We. Samuel reached slowly into the breast pocket of his uniform. He removed a folded piece of paper, worn soft at the creases from being folded and unfolded many times. Ailed it out. Daniel took it and opened it. It was a birth certificate. Grace Kioma Adaoba. Date of birth, March 14th. She was 17 years and 4 months old. Daniel looked up from the paper. He looked at the compound, at the canopy, at the borrowed dress. Something hardened in his chest. Not anger yet, not fully. Something colder than anger. Something that, in a man like Daniel Ose, eventually became action. Who are you? Daniel? A skit. Samuel looked at the girl in the white dress across the compound. His jaw moved. His eyes filled with something enormous that he refused to allow to fall. I am nobody, Samuel said. I am just the man at the gate. But the birth certificate told a different story. In the space marked father's name, someone had written a name and then scratched through it with blue ink. Scratched through it, but not completely. Daniel held the paper toward the light and squinted. The name beneath the scratches was Samuel Adaoba. Daniel Ase did not stop that wedding loudly or dramatically. He did not walk into the compound shouting. He was not that kind of man. He made one phone call. He spoke for 3 minutes, in a voice so calm it frightened his assistant, On the other end, by the time Reginald Mbe had finished tying his agbada, and Constance had finished arranging Grace's headpiece, 2 government vehicles had arrived on the Red Dust Road, officers from the Child Rights Protection Unit, a social welfare representative, and a young woman with a clipboard who asked to see the bride's identification documents. The wedding stopped. Not with a crash, with a silence. El breath. Reginald's face went from burgundy confidence to the gray of a man watching an investment collapse. Constance stood very still in her embroidered wrapper, and looked around the compound with eyes that were calculating exits, calculating lies, calculating whether her daughter's face would give anything away. Grace stood in the borrowed dress, and did not move. She looked at Daniel. She had never seen this man before in her life. She did not know his name. He was standing at the edge of the compound with his hands in the pockets of his suit pants, watching the officers work with the stillness of a man who had already decided how this would end. He looked at her and gave a single nod. She sat down on one of the plastic chairs and put her hands in her lap. For the first time that morning, she breathed. Daniel returned to his hotel that evening, a modest guest house in the local government area, the only one with air conditioning, and spread what he had on the small table by the window. The birth certificate, a photograph Samuel had given him, pressed into his hand in the confusion outside the compound. The photograph showed a young man and a young woman standing outside a church. The man was Samuel, 20 years younger. The woman was Constance, 20 years younger. They were smiling in the way people smile before they learn what life costs. On the back of the photograph, in neat handwriting, "Our wedding, March 1998. Daniel sat with us for a long time. He called his assistant and asked her to find everything she could about Samuel Adaoba, aged approximately 55, last known employer the Okafor Village local government area. The report came back the next morning. Samuel Adaoba had been married to Constance Nwasu in 1998. They had 1 daughter together, Grace, born 2007. In 2009, Constance had filed a petition claiming Samuel had abandoned the family. She had obtained a court order removing his name from Grace's school records, from the household registry, from every off-seal document she could reach. She had told the village he ran away. She had told Grace her father was dead. Samuel had not run away. Samuel had been in the village the entire time. For 15 years, he had watched his daughter walk past the gate where he worked every single morning on her way to school. He had watched her grow from a small child in a yellow dress to a young woman with a mathematics prize. He had never approached her. Constance had made it clear, with specific, quiet, cold clarity, what she would do if he tried. She would tell Grace that Samuel had beaten her, that he had stolen from her, that the scratched-out name on the birth certificate was an erasure she deserved to make. And Samuel, Jendel, quiet Samuel, who pressed his uniform and stood at his gate and watched his daughter from a distance, had believed that a broken-hearted man had no power against a determined woman's words. So he had stayed silent until Reginald MBA appeared. Until the wedding was planned, until the thing that Samuel had spent 15 years dreading, Grace's future being sold, became a reality that silence could no longer survive. Daniel went to find Samuel the next morning. The old man was at his gate, in his uniform, in his position, as if nothing had happened, as if the world had not cracked open the day before and shown its raw interior. "You know, she is your daughter," Daniel said, without preamble. Samuel did not look at him. He looked at the road. "Yes." "And you never told her?" "No." "Why did you come to me? Why not go to the authorities yourself?" Samuel turned then. His eyes were steady, worn, but steady, like old stone that has learned to bear the weight of water without crumbling. "Who listens to a gateman, sir? You think I did not try? 3 years ago I went to the local chairman's office. The clerk took one look at me and told me to come back, with a letter from my supervisor. My supervisor is the chairman's cousin. 2 years ago, I went to the women's ministry office. They gave me a form. The form required a stamp from the ward office. The ward officer wanted payment I could not afford." He looked back at the road. "But a man like you," Samuel said quietly, "a man like you makes one phone call, and the world moves." Daniel was silent for a long time. The morning sun was warm on his shoulders. Somewhere behind them, a woman was singing while she swept her front step. a slow song that moved through the air like smoke. Daniel thought of he thought of all the calls he had made in his life, for contracts, for leverage, for money, for power, and how none of them had felt as simple or as necessary as the one he had made yesterday. "The wedding is cancelled," Daniel said finally. "Reginald Mba will face charges. Your daughter is safe." Samuel pressed his lips together. One nod. "But Samuel—" Daniel looked at him directly. "She doesn't know the truth yet. She doesn't know who really saved her. And she doesn't know you are her father." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Some things," he said slowly, "are better left where they are." "No," Daniel said. "They are not this one." That afternoon, Daniel visited Grace and her court-appointed welfare officer at the guest house. Grace sat across from him with the particular composure of someone who has been surprised by kindness and does not yet trust it. She had changed out of the borrowed dress. She wore a plain blue school uniform blouse tucked into a skirt, and she held a cup of tea she had not yet drunk. "I want to ask you something," Daniel said. "Your father, what were you told about him?" Grace's composure shifted slightly. A small adjustment, like a wall being checked for cracks. "My mother said he died when I was 2. A sickness." "Did you ever doubt that?" A pause. "Once." She looked at the untouched tea. "When I was 12, there was a gateman at the village entrance. He had been there as long as I could remember. And one day I passed him and he said good morning to me, and I said good morning back. And he said—" She stopped. "What did he say?" Grace set down the cup very carefully. "He said, 'Work hard today. I am proud of you.' And he thought, why would a gateman be proud of me? He didn't even know my name. At least, I thought he didn't say loot up. Do you know something about my father?" Daniel looked at her for a long time. He looked at the shape of her eyes. He thought about the right way to say a thing that could not be unsaid. "I think," he said, "that your father has been at that gate every morning for 15 years, watching you walk to school." Grace did not speak. The air in the room went very still. The sound of the village outside, a motorbike, children playing, the distant call to prayer, continued as if the world did not understand that something fundamental had just shifted inside this small room. "Then," Grace said, in a voice so small it barely reached across the table, "is he alive?" "Yes," Daniel said. "He is alive." Daniel met with Constance that evening. He had asked the welfare officer to arrange it. Constance arrived at the guest house in her best wrapper, her chin lifted, her eyes doing quick assessments of exits the way a cornered animal does. She sat down across from Daniel and folded her hands on the table and waited. "I have spoken to the records office," Daniel said. "I have the original marriage certificate. I have testimony from 3 village elders who remember Samuel Adaoba living in your house until 2009. He laid the documents on the table, one by one. And I have the original birth certificate, the one before you filed the amendment, the one where his name is not scratched out." Constance looked at the papers. She looked at Daniel. Something moved across her face. Not guilt, not yet. "Something more pragmatic recalculation that man left us," she said. Her voice was smooth and certain. The voice of a woman who has told a lie so many times it has stopped feeling like one. "He was irresponsible. He brought nothing to that home. He was earning 6,000 naira a month as a gateman," Daniel said quietly. "Half of it went to your compound's rent for 4 years. I have the payment records." Constance's smooth certainty developed a hairline fracture. "He did not leave," Daniel continued. "You removed him. You filed false abandonment papers. You erased his name from every document you could reach. And when your daughter grew old enough to remember him, you told her he was dead." He leaned forward. "Mrs. Adaoba, I want to understand. Why? What did this man do to deserve that?" The silence that followed was the longest of the evening. Finally, quietly, Constance said, "He was too small, too quiet, too nothing. I needed more than a gateman could give me, and I found it, and I did not want him dragging us back." "The man you found," Daniel said. "The man you married next, in 2011. The man Grace has called Uncle Emeka." Constance's eyes went sharp. "He left 2 years later, Daniel continued. And before Reginald Mbea, there were 2 other proposals you considered for Grace. I spoke to the Women's Welfare Coordinator for this local government. He looked at Constance steadily. You tried to arrange this before. Grace was 15 the first time. The man was 53. You withdrew that arrangement only because the man's family asked for a medical certificate, and the process became complicated. The room went so quiet that the hum of the ceiling fan became the loudest thing in the world. Constance sat with her hands still folded on the table. Her wrapper was still immaculate. Her posture was still straight. But her eyes had changed. They looked like the eyes of a woman standing in the ruins of a story she had told herself for so long. She had forgotten where the walls were supposed to be. She was going to waste it, Constance said finally. Her voice was very quiet now. Almost a whisper. All those books? All that school? For what? To be a teacher. To struggle the way I struggled. I wanted her to be settled. Secured. To never have to beg. You wanted her sold, Daniel said. The words were not cruel. They were exact. Constance said nothing. The confrontation Daniel had been building toward arrived the next morning. He had asked the welfare officer, the local government women's rights coordinator, and a junior magistrate to be present. He had also, and this was the part no one in the village expected, asked Samuel to come. Samuel arrived at the guest house in his pressed uniform. He stood at the doorway of the meeting room and looked at the table where Constance sat, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, not even close to forgiveness, but recognition. The kind that happens when 2 people look at each other and acknowledge, without speaking, the full weight of what was done. Grace was not in the room yet. That was intentional. Constance looked at Samuel and her face did something complicated. Pride tried to hold its shape. It failed. You, she said, flat. Not a greeting. Constance, Samuel said. Just her name, nothing more. Nothing more. The magistrate asked Constance to confirm the events of 2009, the filing, the amendments, the court petition. Constance confirmed them. She was not a stupid woman. She knew when a room had no exits. She answered each question in complete sentences and looked straight ahead. Then the magistrate looked at the documents on the table. Mrs. Adaoba, the filing of a false abandonment petition is a criminal matter under the Family Law Act. The falsification of a minor's records is a separate charge. The arrangement of a marriage for a minor, regardless of whether the ceremony was completed, constitutes a violation of the Child Rights Act, as adopted in this state, Section 21, which carries a minimum. I know what it carries, Constance said. Then you understand, the magistrate said, the position you are in. Constance sat with that. The air in the room smelled of paper and old wood and the faint sweetness of someone's breakfast still drifting from the kitchen. She turned and looked at Samuel for a long moment. Why? She said, and for the first time, there was something real underneath the word. Something cracked and human. Why did you fight for her now, after all this time? Samuel's answer was very quiet. It landed in the room like a stone into still water. Because some things, he said, a man can put down, and some things he cannot. She is what I cannot put down. Friends, if this story is moving you, subscribe now to Untold African Folktales Stories. The ending of this story will change how you see everything. Let us continue. Daniel stood then. He had been patient. He had let the legal proceedings take their shape. But now he looked at Constance, and he spoke the words the story had been building toward from the very first scene. You told your daughter her father was dead, he said. He was standing at a gate 300 meters from your front door. You tried to sell her, not once, not twice, to old men with money, because you decided that her dreams were less valuable than your comfort. You erased a man from his own child's life, because he was not impressive enough for you, and when he tried to find his way back to her through letters, through the ward-offs, through every small door available to a man of no power, you closed every one of those doors. He paused. You did not do these things because you were poor. Poverty does not make a person cruel. You did them because you decided that your daughter was a resource. Something to be managed, something to be spent. He looked at her directly. A mother's love is not ownership. A parent does not own a child's future. That future belongs to Grace. It always belonged to Grace. And every person in this room, and eventually everyone in this village, will know what you chose to do with it. Constance pressed her lips together. One tear ran down the left side of her face. She did not wipe it. Grace came into the room after the legal proceedings were complete. She had been waiting in the guest-house garden, sitting on a concrete bench under an old mango tree, her school bag on her lap, as if she had somewhere to be next. As if she was still in the middle of all of this, a student who kept her textbooks covered in brown paper and arrived before the gate opened. The welfare officer brought her in. She stood in the doorway and looked at the people in the room. She looked at Daniel, she looked at her mother, who would not meet her eyes. And then she looked at Samuel, in his pressed green uniform, standing near the window, with his hands at his sides, and his eyes full of the 15 years he had not been allowed to spend with her. She looked at him for a long moment. The room was silent. "You said you were proud of me," Grace said slowly. Her voice was the voice of a girl reassembling a memory in real time. "That morning, when I was 12. She took a breath. "You said you were proud of me." Samuel could not speak. He tried. His jaw worked. His eyes that were the same shape as hers, filled and spilled, and he did not wipe his face. He nodded. Grace crossed the room. It took 4 steps. 4 steps across old floorboards in a guest house in a village in the middle of an ordinary morning that was not ordinary at all. And she put her arms around the old gateman in the faded green uniform and pressed her face against his shoulder and made no sound. Samuel put his arms around his daughter for the first time since she was 2 years old. His hands, large, rough. The hands of a man who had worked his whole life, held her as carefully as if she were made of the most fragile thing in the world. Outside the window, the mango tree moved in the morning breeze. A bird called once, twice, and was quiet. The man who had stood at the gate and watched his daughter walk to school every day for 15 years had finally come inside. Reginald Mba was formally charged 3 days later. The charges: attempting to contract a marriage with a minor, conspiracy with a parent or guardian to violate the Child Rights Act, were filed with the state magistrate court. His name appeared in the regional newspaper beneath a headline that was not kind. His palm oil business partners issued a terse statement distancing themselves. His eldest son, who had known nothing of the plan, arrived from Lagos and did not speak to his father for 6 months. Constance was charged with falsification of records and filing of a false legal petition. Her bail was paid by Daniel, a detail the village could not stop talking about, on condition of full cooperation with the court proceedings and mandatory family counseling. She did not understand why Daniel paid her bail. She asked the welfare officer to ask him. Daniel sent back 3 words: "For Grace's sake." Grace's examination, registration was reinstated. Her school principal, a small woman with reading glasses and an enormous sense of justice, drove personally to the welfare office to file the reinstatement papers and brought Grace a new set of exercise books tied with a yellow ribbon. And Daniel Say, who had come to Okafa village for 4 hours to check on a road construction site, sat with Samuel under the mango tree in the guest-house garden on his last evening there, and said something he had not planned to say to anyone. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said. Samuel looked at him. "I am sorry. I have been building things since then." Buildings, roads, contracts, things you can measure. He looked at the darkening sky. "I did not know I was looking for something I could not measure until I came here." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Then, what did you find?" Daniel thought about it honestly. He thought about the phone call that took 3 minutes. He thought about the birth certificate folded soft at the creases. He thought about a girl crossing a room in 4 steps to reach someone who had waited 15 years to be reached. That the most important things, Daniel said, are always done by the people. Nobody is watching. Samuel looked at the old gate down the road. He had stood there for 15 years. He had been the nobody that nobody watched. He nodded slowly. Year passé, as years do, carrying within them more change than they announce at the start. Grace Kioma Adaoba sat the West African Senior School Certificate examination in June and received her results in August. She passed with distinctions in mathematics, further mathematics, physics, and economics. Her principal framed a copy of the results sheet and hung it in the school foyer next to a photograph of Grace at the mathematics prize ceremony, her smile wide and unguarded, a smile that had not learned yet that the world would try to take things from it. She was offered a scholarship, not a small scholarship, a full scholarship to study engineering at the State University, funded by the ASA Construction Group Foundation, a foundation Daniel had established, initially in Eddie's name, that now added Grace's story to the quiet record of its reasons for existing. Grace moved into the university dormitory in September. She carried 2 bags, one of clothes, one of books. On the last morning before she left, she walked to the village gate at 6 o'clock in the morning, before the day had fully decided to begin, and found Samuel already at his post. She brought him a flask of tea she had made herself. She sat with him for 20 minutes on the wooden stool beside the gatehouse, and they talked about small things. The weather, her roommate, whether the university canteen served proper soup in the way that people talk when the large things have already been said, and what remains is the sweet, ordinary business of knowing someone. When she stood to leave, she said, "I will call you on Sunday." "I will be here," Samuel said. She walked away down the road with her 2 bags, and Samuel watched her go. And this time, the watching was different. It was not the watching of a man keeping his distance. It was the watching of a father who knows that his daughter is going towards something good, and that he will still be here when she comes back. He straightened his spine. Constance completed her counseling sessions. She did not become a different woman overnight. People rarely do, but she became a quieter one, a woman sitting with the rubble of her choices, picking through it carefully to find what might still be used. She wrote Grace a letter in November. 3 pages. She did not ask for forgiveness in the letter. She said she understood she had not earned the right to ask for it yet. She asked only that Grace knew she was proud of her, that she had always been proud of her, that pride and love, she was learning, are not the same as wisdom. Grace read the letter twice. She folded it and kept it. She did not write back immediately, but she kept it. Reginald Mbe was convicted on 2 counts and fined heavily by the court. He paid the fine and retreated from public life in the region. He was a man who had believed his money made him above certain rules. He learned that it did not. Some lessons are expensive in the learning, and Daniel Asay returned to Okafor village twice in that year. Once in December, for the off-seal completion ceremony of the road his company had built, and once in March, quietly, without announcement, to have tea under the mango tree with Samuel, who always made the tea too strong but who told stories of Grace's childhood, the small fragments he had collected from a distance that Daniel listened to the way you listen to music you have needed without knowing it. He was still building things, but he was building differently now, with more attention to what could not be measured. The village of Okafor would tell many versions of this story in the years that followed. They would argue over which version was true. Most of them would praise Daniel Asaya, the wealthy man who stepped out of his car and stopped a wedding with 1 phone call. His name would be the one spoken at town meetings, the one parents held up to their children as an example of using privilege well. And that was true. And it was right to say it. But there were those, the older ones, the ones who sat at their own gates and watched the world move past, who told a different version, who said, "Go and look at what was already there before the black car arrived. Go and look at the man in the faded green uniform with his spine bent by years of quiet sacrifice. Go and look at what love looks like when it has no audience, when it receives no praise, when it stands at a rusty gate in the early morning and says good morning to a daughter who does not yet know she is loved." That man did not make 1 phone call. He spent 15 years making the only offering he had, his presence, his patience, his refusal to disappear entirely from the edges of a life he had been removed from. The wealthy man stopped the wedding, but the gateman had been saving Grace long before any car arrived. And so the lesson of Okafor village settled into the dust of the red road, into the shade of the mango tree, into the crease of a folded birth certificate and the pressed collar of a faded uniform. It settled there, and waited for anyone wise enough to find it. The people we overlook are rarely the people we should overlook, and the love that saves us is rarely the love that announces itself. Thank you for joining us for this story. Friends, if Grace's journey moved something in you, if Samuel Esquire love reminded you of someone in your own life, please subscribe to Untold African Stories and click the bell so you never miss a story like this one. These are the stories that matter, the ones where the truth hides in plain sight, the ones where the hero is standing at a gate in a faded green uniform, waiting to be seen. Watch our next story here. We will be waiting for you.